She married an 81-year-old Greek widower with one goal only. I learned that later. At the time, I was standing at the foot of the bed at 11:38 p.m., holding my phone, watching the screen light up and then go dark again. The hotel room smelled faintly of disinfectant and roses. The balcony door was open an inch. Somewhere below, a chair scraped across tile and then went quiet. What should have happened next didn't. He didn't sit. He didn't smile. He reached into the bedside drawer and took out a folder instead. I remember the sound of paper sliding against paper. Slow, careful. He placed the folder on the bed between us and said, "We should be clear before anything else." His voice didn't shake. He tapped the top page with one finger. I noticed his wedding band was already off. The document had my name on it. Full name. Correct spelling. The date was today. When suddenly he turned the page and said something that made me understand why the door had been left unlocked. He didn't wait for me to sit. He stayed standing, one hand on the back of the chair, the other resting on the folder. The bedside lamp was on low. The shade leaned slightly to the left. I noticed it because he straightened it before speaking again. "This isn't a surprise," he said. "It's a condition." The top page was titled in Greek. Below it, an English translation. Prenuptial addendum. Effective immediately. The margins were narrow. Every paragraph was numbered. My name appeared 3 times. His appeared once, in a block signature at the end, already signed. He slid the folder closer to me. "You'll sign tonight," he said, "or you won't stay." I picked up the page and read the first section. It listed assets excluded from marital property. There were addresses I recognized from the drive earlier. A coastal house, an apartment in Athens, a bank name I'd seen on the transfer receipt that morning. I turned the page. The second section covered access. No shared accounts. No authority to transact. No beneficiary changes. The third section addressed residency. I would vacate the primary residence within 48 hours if requested. No explanation required. I looked up. He was watching my hands, not my face. "This wasn't discussed," I said. He nodded once. "Correct." I set the page back down. The paper made a dry sound against the duvet. I noticed the pen on the nightstand wasn't capped. It was placed parallel to the edge. "Ready." I thought we agreed. I started. He interrupted me, not loudly. "We agreed to marry," he said. "We did that." The balcony curtain moved slightly. I stepped back and felt the carpet bunch under my heel. I shifted my weight and stood still. He reached into the folder and removed another page. This one was a notarized statement dated 3 days earlier. It referenced a trust, irrevocable, administered by a third party. The beneficiaries were listed as charities. There was a clause for surviving spouses. It named me, but only for occupancy rights, limited, revocable. "You won't be poor," he said. "You just won't own." I asked who prepared it. He gave a name. I recognized it from a law firm sign I'd passed twice that week. I asked when he decided. He said before the engagement dinner. I asked why he waited. He said because people behave differently when the room is quiet. I picked up my phone. No signal. The hotel Wi-Fi was still connecting. I put the phone face down and slid it under the lamp. "Is this negotiable?" I asked. He shook his head. "No." I flipped to the last page. The signature line waited. The date was filled in. The witness section was blank. He glanced at the door. "There's a notary downstairs," he said. "She'll come up." I asked if this was about trust. He corrected me. "It's about patterns." I closed the folder and stood. My dress caught on the corner of the chair. I freed it and smoothed the fabric without thinking. I looked at the mirror above the desk. My earrings were still in. One was loose. I tightened it. He didn't move to stop me. "Take your time," he said, "but not too much." I walked to the bathroom and closed the door. The light flickered once and held. I ran the tap and waited until the water warmed. I dried my hands and leaned against the counter. The clock on my phone updated. 11:54 p.m. When I opened the door again, the folder was back on the bed. The pen hadn't moved. He had removed his jacket and folded it over the chair. Down the hall, a door opened and shut. Footsteps paused outside our room. Then they moved on. I sat on the edge of the bed and picked up the pen. I didn't sign right away. I turned the pen in my fingers and checked the tip. Ink stained the pad beneath it, a small half moon where someone had tested it earlier. I placed the pen down and asked for water. He went to the minibar and brought back a glass without ice. He didn't drink any himself. He set the glass on the nightstand and nudged it closer to me, then stepped back to the chair. I read the pages again, slower. The trust language repeated itself. No amendments. No influence. No expectation. I noted the dates. I noted the witnesses. I noted what wasn't there. There was no mention of the villa on the island where we'd taken photos that afternoon. There was no mention of the ring he'd insisted be insured separately. I asked about the villa. He said it belonged to the trust. I asked when it had been transferred. He said last year. I asked why we'd gone there. He said because it was available. I set the glass down without drinking. The rim left a circle on the wood. He checked his watch. The notary is waiting. He said, there was a knock. He opened the door and stepped aside. A woman came in carrying a leather case. She wore flats and kept her eyes on the paperwork. She placed the case on the desk and asked for identification. I handed mine over. She copied the number carefully. She asked if I understood the document. I said I understood the words. She asked if I was signing voluntarily. I didn't answer right away. She looked at him. He nodded once. I signed. The pen pressed harder than I expected. My name looked uneven. The notary stamped the page and initialed the margin. She tore off a receipt and placed it inside her case. She wished us congratulations and left without looking back. When the door closed, he exhaled and loosened his collar. He picked up the folder and slid it into the bedside drawer. The drawer closed quietly. We should sleep, he said. I stood and went to the window. The balcony door was still open. I closed it and turned the latch. The room went quiet. He lay down on his side of the bed and reached for the lamp. I asked one more question before the light went off. Why marry me? I said. He paused. Because you asked, he said, and because I wanted to see what you'd do. The lamp clicked off. I didn't move for a long time. The mattress dipped slightly as he shifted. His breathing stayed even. At some point, I picked up my phone and connected to the Wi-Fi. Messages loaded at once. 3 from his niece. 1 from a friend I hadn't spoken to in months. I didn't open any of them. At 1:26 a.m., I opened the Notes app and wrote one line. Not a plan, just a number and a date. I saved it and locked the phone. In the bathroom, I removed my earrings and placed them in the sink instead of the tray. I washed my hands and dried them on the towel that wasn't hanging straight. I fixed the towel and left the bathroom light on. When I returned, he was asleep. The bedside drawer remained closed. I lay down fully clothed and stared at the ceiling until the air conditioning cycled off and on again. At 5:02 a.m., I got up quietly and checked the drawer. The folder was still there. I took one photo of the first page and put everything back exactly as it was. By morning, nothing had changed. That was the problem. Breakfast was served at 7:30. I didn't order it. It arrived anyway, pushed in by room service without comment. He sat at the small table by the window and read the paper in Greek. He folded it precisely when he finished and set it beside the plate. You didn't sleep, he said, without looking up. I poured tea and watched steam rise, then fade. I drank half and left the rest. At 8:12 a.m., his niece called. He answered on speaker. She asked if everything went well. He said yes. She asked if we were celebrating. He said later. She laughed and said she'd stop by in the afternoon. He agreed and ended the call. I asked where we were going after checkout. He said the house. I asked which one. He named the coastal property. I asked if it was in the trust. He said yes. He said occupancy was permitted. We checked out at 9:01 a.m. The clerk asked if we needed help with bags. He said no. Outside, the driver waited with the engine running. I sat in the back. He sat in front. On the drive, my phone vibrated twice. I didn't look. He adjusted the mirror and asked if I was comfortable. I said yes. The house had a gate and a camera above it. He entered a code. The gate opened. Inside, the living room smelled of citrus cleaner. The furniture was covered with light cloths. He removed them and folded each one, placing them in a basket. Make yourself at home, he said. At 10:46 a.m., his niece arrived. She kissed his cheek and nodded at me. She walked through the rooms as if counting them. She asked if I liked the place. I said it was quiet. She smiled and said it would be. She sat at the table and asked about the paperwork. He said it was handled. She asked if I understood. He answered before I could. He said yes. She looked at me and asked if I felt settled. I said I needed to unpack. At 11:30 a.m., he went upstairs to nap. His niece stayed behind and poured coffee. She asked how we met. I gave the short version. She said he liked clarity. She said he'd been careful since his first wife died. She said people tried things. She didn't elaborate. She left at noon. I locked the door behind her and tested the handle twice. In the afternoon, I unpacked slowly. I placed my clothes in one drawer and left the rest in the suitcase. I set my toiletries on the sink in a straight line. I noticed there was no cabinet space cleared for me. At 2:17 p.m., I opened the laptop and connected to the house Wi-Fi. The network name included his initials. The password was a date. I guessed it on the second try. I checked the router settings and took a screenshot of connected devices. There were 3. One was mine. At 3:04 p.m., I received a message from his niece. He's protective. Don't take it personally. I didn't reply. At 4:22 p.m., he came downstairs and asked if I wanted to walk. We walked along the path by the water. He pointed out where repairs were planned. He mentioned costs in passing. I nodded. At 5:50 p.m., he poured wine. I declined. He drank alone and said he preferred routines. He said surprises created problems. He asked if I agreed. I said routines were easier. That night, I slept on my side of the bed. The lamp on his side stayed on. At 11:09 p.m., I heard the printer downstairs start and stop. In the morning, a stack of papers sat on the desk. On top was a label, housekeeping schedule. I took a photo and put the phone away. The schedule wasn't about cleaning. I understood that by the second page. Each room was listed with time blocks, access windows, notes about when the house would be empty. A line for owner presence ran down the right margin. My name wasn't on it. His was marked with initials. At 7:18 a.m., he came into the kitchen and asked if I'd seen the printer jam. I said no. He poured coffee and set the mug on the counter instead of the table. He read the schedule again and folded it into thirds. He placed it in his jacket pocket. I like order, he said. It keeps things calm. At 8:02 a.m., a woman arrived to check the water heater. She asked for access to the utility room. He walked her there and stayed inside while she worked. I waited in the kitchen and watched the kettle light turn off by itself. By 9:30 a.m., he had left for an appointment. He said he'd be back before lunch. He took the car. I watched the gate close and then reopen as a delivery truck came in. The driver left a package at the door and drove off. The package contained a lock set. The receipt inside was dated the week before the wedding. I took a photo of the receipt and put the lock back in the box. I set the box in the hallway where it would be seen. At 10:11 a.m., his niece texted. He's strict. Don't push. I archived the message. I walked through the house with my phone in my pocket and counted cameras. One by the gate, one in the living room corner, one in the hallway near the stairs. I didn't touch them. I noted their angles. At 11:06 a.m., I sat at the desk and opened the laptop. I created a folder with the address as the name. I saved the photos I'd taken and labeled them with times. I didn't upload anything. He returned at 12:24 p.m. with groceries. He put them away himself and asked me to sit. He said there were house expectations. He said visitors should be announced. He said finances were handled already. He said the schedule applied to everyone. I asked where my name fit. He said we would add it later. At 1:15 p.m., the phone rang. It was the notary from the hotel. She asked to confirm receipt of the documents by the trust office. He took the call and stepped outside. I could hear his voice through the door. Come. Short answers. When he came back, he said everything was finalized. In the afternoon, I took a walk alone. The path by the water had a loose stone near the edge. I stepped around it. I sat on a bench and watched a boat pass. I checked my phone and saw no signal. I took a screenshot anyway. At 4:08 p.m., I returned to the house. The lockbox in the hallway had been moved closer to the door. The box was open. Inside were spare keys labeled by room. None were labeled with my name. I closed the box and set it back where it had been. At 5:40 p.m., he asked what I'd done all day. I said I'd unpacked and walked. He nodded and said routines take time. During dinner, he spoke about his first wife. He said she valued independence. He said it worked because she understood boundaries. He said misunderstandings ruin marriages. After dinner, he locked the door himself. He checked the cameras on his phone. I saw the screens reflected in the window. At 10:02 p.m., he turned off the lights downstairs and said goodnight. I went upstairs and closed the bedroom door. The lock clicked. I tested it twice. On the desk, the printer tray held fresh paper. The top sheet was blank except for a header in Greek and a line underneath for signatures. I took a photo and put the paper back. The header translated cleanly when I checked it the next morning. House access authorization. Below it were columns for names, rooms, dates, and signatures. His name appeared twice. Mine didn't appear at all. At 7:06 a.m., I heard him downstairs on the phone. His voice stayed low. He mentioned the schedule and no changes. He ended the call and began moving chairs, one at a time, aligning them with the table edge. I came down at 7:24 a.m. He asked if I slept well. I said yes. He slid a plate toward me and asked me to initial the corner of a delivery receipt. I initialed where he pointed. He folded it and placed it with the others. At 8:18 a.m., a man arrived to service the cameras. He wore a badge clipped to his belt. My husband walked him through the house and explained angles. He didn't introduce me. The man nodded at me once and kept working. When they reached the hallway camera, my husband asked if the motion sensitivity could be adjusted. The technician said yes. He asked who should be notified if it triggered. My husband gave his own number. He didn't mention a second contact. At 9:41 a.m., the technician left. The house felt smaller. I opened the laptop and checked the router again. A new device appeared and disappeared within minutes. I refreshed the page and saved the log. I named the file with the date and time. At 10:22 a.m., his niece arrived unannounced. She used a key from the lockbox. She looked at the box and then at me as if checking whether I'd noticed. She asked if I liked living near the water. I said it was quiet. She walked into the study and asked where he kept important papers. I said I wasn't sure. She smiled and said he trusted me now. She picked up a folder from the desk and flipped through it. I watched her hands. She set it down and asked if we were planning a trip. I said no plans yet. At 11:05 a.m., my husband came in and asked if everything was fine. She said yes and left soon after. He locked the door behind her and returned the key to the box. At noon, he asked me to sit at the table. He placed the authorization form in front of me and a pen beside it. He said it was standard. He said it protected everyone. He said it would make things easier. I read the form. It granted access to rooms at designated times. It listed exclusions. The bedroom was excluded. So was the study. The kitchen was shared during set hours. The living room had restrictions during calls. I asked how long it would be in place. He said indefinitely. I asked what would happen if I didn't sign. He said nothing would change. I signed. At 12:37 p.m., he collected the paper and placed it in the printer tray. The printer hummed and produced a copy. He checked it and initialed the margin. He put the original into a folder labeled House. In the afternoon, I reorganized my suitcase. I left most things inside. I placed my passport back into the inner pocket and zipped it. I checked that my phone charger was in the bag. At 3:54 p.m., a message arrived from an unknown number. This is for your safety. No name. I saved it. At 5:20 p.m., he asked if I needed anything. I said no. He nodded and turned on the television without sound. That night, I lay awake listening to the printer cycle again. In the morning, a new page sat on top of the stack. It listed names under authorized visitors. His niece was first. Mine was blank. I took a photo and put the phone away. The first time the lock clicked during the day, I was in the kitchen. It was 9:12 a.m. I was rinsing a cup when I heard the sound from the hallway. Not the front door. The interior lock. The one that separated the study from the rest of the house. I dried my hands and stood still. He came in a minute later and asked if I wanted breakfast. He spoke as if nothing had happened. He poured coffee and didn't offer me any. I watched the steam rise and then disappear. At 9:28 a.m., his niece arrived again. This time she didn't knock. She went straight upstairs. I stayed where I was. I heard drawers open and close. A chair scraped the floor. Then the printer started. When she came back down, she carried a thin envelope. She placed it on the table and slid it toward him. He didn't open it. He nodded once. She looked at me and said, "He's just being careful." Then she left. At 10:11 a.m., I checked the router logs. 2 new devices had connected and disconnected within 5 minutes. I saved the log. I didn't change anything. At 10:44 a.m., I received an email notification from a Greek address I didn't recognize. Subject line, confirmation. I opened it. It referenced a property inventory update. Attached was a PDF listing items by room. Jewelry, art, documents. The bedroom section listed his items only. My name appeared once, next to personal effects, without details. I saved the file. At noon, he asked if I wanted to go into town. I said I needed to make a call. He nodded and said he would be back later. He took his phone and keys and left the house. The gate closed behind him. I sat at the desk and opened my laptop. I translated the inventory line by line. The date matched that morning. I noted the signatures at the bottom. His and a third party I didn't recognize. I checked the firm's name. It matched the law office from the prenuptial addendum. At 1:37 p.m., I called the number on the document. A receptionist answered and asked how she could help. I asked for clarification on an inventory notice. She asked for a file number. I read it from the PDF. She paused and said she would check. She came back and said the update was routine. She said it was requested by the client. She said the spouse was notified automatically. I asked how. She said by email. I thanked her and ended the call. At 2:05 p.m., I checked my inbox again. The email had arrived 5 minutes before his niece came upstairs. In the afternoon, I packed a small bag. Not everything, just documents, charger, passport, and the notebook. I left the bag by the door, partially zipped. At 3:22 p.m., he returned. He saw the bag and asked where I was going. I said for a walk. He asked when I'd be back. I said before dinner. He nodded and reminded me to take my phone. I did. Outside, the path by the water was busier than usual. A couple argued quietly near the railing. A child dropped a hat and picked it up. I sat on the bench and checked my messages. At 4:01 p.m., a new email arrived from the same firm. Subject line, spousal occupancy. It stated that my right to occupy the residence was acknowledged and could be reviewed quarterly. The first review date was listed 30 days from now. I saved the email and stood up. When I returned to the house, the front door was unlocked. The lockbox was open again. Inside, one key was missing. That night, he asked me to sign another page. I said I needed to read it in the morning. He didn't argue. He turned off the light and locked the door from his side. I lay awake and listened to the camera hum softly above the hallway. I read the page at the kitchen table while he watched the news without sound. It wasn't long. 2 sections. 1 signature line. It acknowledged receipt of the inventory update and affirmed cooperation with future reviews. The language was careful. It didn't grant anything. It confirmed awareness. I asked if it changed my access. He said no. I asked if it changed the schedule. He said no. I asked why it was needed. He said documentation mattered. I folded the page and set it beside my plate. I didn't sign. At 7:48 a.m. the next morning, a car pulled into the drive. I recognized the logo on the door from the inventory email. 2 men stepped out. One carried a tablet. The other carried a camera case. They didn't knock. He opened the door for them. They walked room to room. They photographed items. They checked serial numbers. They spoke in low voices and marked boxes on the tablet. When they reached the bedroom, one of them paused and looked at me. He asked if there were any items to declare. I said no. My husband stood in the doorway and watched. At 9:02 a.m., the men left. He locked the door and placed the key back into the box. He looked at the page I hadn't signed and said we could revisit it later. He folded it and put it in his jacket. At 9:27 a.m., my phone vibrated with an unknown number. The message read, "If you need help understanding the inventory process, call me." There was a name beneath it, not his. I saved the message. At 10:15 a.m., I went upstairs and packed the rest of my clothes. I folded them carefully and placed them back into the suitcase. I left the drawers empty. I left the hangers where they were. When I came down, he was on the phone again. He said the word compliant twice. He ended the call and asked what I was doing. I said I was organizing. At 11:40 a.m., his niece arrived. She went straight to the kitchen and poured herself coffee. She asked if I was settling in. I said I was adjusting. She smiled and said adjustment took time. She mentioned the inventory, casually. She said it was standard in families like theirs. She said it protected everyone. She asked if I'd signed the acknowledgement. He answered before I could. He said not yet. She looked at me longer than before and said, "You should." At noon, she left. He locked the door again. In the afternoon, I sat at the desk and opened the notebook. I wrote down dates: the wedding, the addendum, the inventory update, the occupancy review date. I didn't write commentary, just entries. At 2:18 p.m., I called the number from the message. The man answered and identified himself as an administrator. He asked how he could help. I asked how inventory disputes were handled. He said disputes were rare. He said everything was documented. He said records favored clarity. I asked what happened if a spouse declined to sign acknowledgments. He paused and said then notes were added. He said notes were reviewed. I thanked him and ended the call. At 3:06 p.m., I checked the gate camera feed on his tablet while it sat charging on the counter. I didn't touch anything. I noted the brand. At 4:30 p.m., I packed my bag and left it by the door again. This time I zipped it fully. At dinner, he asked if I was planning to go somewhere. I said I had an appointment the next day. He asked with whom. I said paperwork. He nodded and said paperwork had a way of clarifying intentions. That night, I slept dressed. At 2:14 a.m., I heard the printer start again. In the morning, the page waited on the desk. The same acknowledgement. A new date. I placed it back in the tray and closed the lid. By noon, the gate code changed. I learned that when it didn't open, I stood at the gate and entered the code again, slower this time. The keypad beeped once and went dark. I stepped back and checked the screen on my phone. No signal. I tried the side latch. It didn't move. At 12:19 p.m., a car slowed on the road and passed without stopping. I waited until it was out of sight and tried the code a third time. Same result. I walked back to the house and found the front door locked. The interior lights were on. I knocked once. No answer. I knocked again and waited. Nothing changed. I went around to the utility door near the water heater. It was locked. The camera above it followed me as I stepped back into view. I raised my hand once, not waving, just enough to be seen. At 12:31 p.m., my phone connected briefly. A message loaded from an unknown number. You can use the side path today. Please don't make this difficult. I saved it. The signal dropped again. The side path led around the hedge to a service gate. It opened with a physical key. The lockbox beside it was empty. I sat on the low wall and waited. After a few minutes, the house door opened. He stepped out with his jacket already on. He looked toward the road, and then at me. The code was updated. He said, "I forgot to tell you." I stood and brushed dust from my hands. I didn't ask why. He walked past me and unlocked the service gate. He didn't hand me the key. He held the gate while I passed through and then locked it behind me. Inside, he said the update was temporary. He said there had been too many entries. He said it was safer this way. He said we would review access after the inventory process concluded. I went upstairs and opened the suitcase. I checked that everything was still inside. My passport was where I'd left it. The notebook was on top. At 1:18 p.m., an email arrived. Subject line, occupancy review notice. It stated that a preliminary review had been scheduled for the following week. It listed attendees. My name was included as observer. I forwarded the email and closed the laptop. At 2:07 p.m., his niece called. I answered and put the phone on the table. She said the gate issue was a misunderstanding. She said he worried about safety. She said older people needed structure. She said I shouldn't take things personally. I asked if she had a key. She said yes. She said everyone did. She said it made life easier. I thanked her and ended the call. At 3:42 p.m., I heard the camera alert tone from his phone in the kitchen. He checked it and said someone was at the gate. He went outside and returned with a man carrying a clipboard. The man asked for access to the study. He didn't ask me. They stayed inside for 20 minutes. When they came out, the man handed him a signed page and left. I watched the gate close again. At 4:36 p.m., I received a message from the administrator I'd spoken to earlier. Please confirm whether you will attend the review. I replied yes. At 5:10 p.m., I packed the small bag again. I placed it by the door. He noticed it and said nothing. During dinner, he spoke about schedules and procedures. He said everything worked better when people followed them. He asked if I agreed. I said routines were predictable. That night, the camera in the hallway blinked twice and went steady. I lay awake and listened to the house settle. At 6:45 a.m., I woke to the sound of the printer. On the desk was a new document, title in Greek. Below it, in English, temporary access suspension, pending review. My name appeared once. I took a photo, placed the paper back exactly where it was, and zipped the bag. When I reached for the door, it opened from the other side. The administrator stood there with a folder in his